Hey, what's up, folks? This is Ralski, and I'd like to introduce you a bit into my world. The term latchkey kids was generally used in the 70s and 80s to describe Gen Xers. A lot of kids came from divorced families and were considered day orphans. Generally, the child would come home to an empty house while their parents were at work, and they were often left at home alone with no supervision. There were times where the child could be at a daycare center or keep themselves at a public library after school lets out, or they would go with family or friends and stay at their house until the parents return home from work. Being home alone on a regular basis often led to loneliness, boredom, peer pressure, smoking, and even drug abuse. Some of the positive aspects of being a latchkey kid have been shown that children learn self-reliance, adaptation, and the desire to contribute. But they can also suffer with low self-esteem and have some conduct disorders and hyperactivity. Through my own personal experiences, I mostly remember when I was in grade school, which is basically first grade through sixth grade, that I was fortunate to have a daycare center, which was maybe less than a block away from my elementary school. So after school, which generally would let out around 2:30 or 3, I would walk to the daycare center and stay there until either my parents got off of work and they would pick me up, or I would walk home. Where we lived was maybe about 4 or 5 blocks away from the daycare center, so it wasn't much of an issue to walk home during the day. But especially when time changes came about, it made it a little bit more challenging to walk home in the dark, as of course it wasn't safe for a younger child to do so. Through my experience being in the daycare centers, I was always kind of a loner anyway. Being an only child, I wasn't used to sharing, I wasn't used to playing with others, and I kind of had a different mindset. In my elementary school, they initially put me in the gifted program, which meant basically that I was excelling over the average child and was learning things a lot quicker than normal. Around 3rd grade, they tried to put me into Catholic school, which they thought a private school would help keep me in line and help me with some of my academic issues. The private school didn't really help much, and if anything, they told me that they couldn't handle me and they skipped me a grade, and if I'm not mistaken, I believe I skipped 3rd grade and went directly from 2nd grade to 4th grade and right back into public school. When I was in public school, they generally had me doing a lot of testing, which meant I was kind of secluded from the normal kids, quote unquote, and gathered with a lot of the mentally challenged kids. They need to be challenged in different ways, and their whole thought process has to be accepted and noted accordingly. Even when we went out to play in public, generally the handicapped, the mentally ill, or the retarded children would play amongst themselves while the normal kids played on the other side of the field. There was really no interaction between the two, and I kind of felt lost in the fulcrum of both worlds. Most of the time I spent my days by myself, sitting on the bench, observing and watching others play. Very rarely did I have friends that I associated with or shared experiences with or played with, mainly because I didn't really feel like I associated with them. Even in daycare, it was the same. They had games like tetherball, hopscotch, basketball, handball, and kids would line up and play with each other, while I pretty much sat on the bench and just watched underneath a tree. I tried to read books even back then, but my attention span was all over the place. I couldn't get through 2 pages or 3 pages of a book without my mind wandering, and to this day, it's still pretty much the same. Once I got a bit older, of course, I started to rebel. I had a lot of time to myself and gave in to a lot of peer pressure. I started smoking cigarettes at a younger age, started to dabble in some alcohol and drugs, and it was close to my 5th or 6th grade when I was going into junior high school that I was probably really on a spiral downward. Although I felt self-efficient and able to take care of myself, I lacked a connection with people, let alone my parents. Nothing bad towards them, of course. I mean, they were young parents. They had to work, put food on the table, and keep a roof over our heads. But as young parents know, they also had a life to live as well. I had to not only be woven into their lives, but at a young age I had to learn to weave my own life. Through that process, I think, came a lot of the effects, which would be loneliness, boredom, peer pressure, and all of that other stuff that kind of comes along with being on your own. I felt pressured by others to do things and make decisions. It was challenging. It was exciting. Some of it was fun. Some of it was dangerous. But I have to say that I'm glad that I got it out of my system at a young age. By the time I was a mid to late teen, I was pretty much at my peak of self-destructiveness. I had already been what would be considered a cutter these days, trying to find ways to deal with my own pain and my own torment, self-inflicted, if you will. Because as we all know, outside influence and pain can be really hurtful. So in closing, that's just a bit of insight as to the person I am today. Looking back and reflecting on the child that I was makes a lot of sense to me, and should probably make a lot of sense to others who know me. That this is where I came from, this is who I was, this is who I am, and this is who I will remain to be. If there are people out there who can relate to anything that I've said or any of the experiences that I've gone through, just know that you're not alone. And it's not necessarily a bad thing. I mean, hell, they've made several movies. One that pops into mind is The Breakfast Club. You had so many different kids inside this one room. They were all misfits of sorts, and they all had their own personalities. They were in there for different reasons, but they had a common bond. And that common bond was the fact that they felt outcasted from their own peers. And somehow, through the end of the movie, they were able to find similarities and find some kind of connection through what normally would be considered a bad experience. Thanks for listening, folks, and I'll see you around for the next video.